Hello and welcome to Murder with Friends, the show where two friends together and talk about the darker sides of history. I'm your host, Grace Baldridge, and joining me today, I hope I pronounced this right, Samantha Schacher. Sam!
You said Shaker. It's Schacher.
Can I just say, I've been planning on doing that since yesterday. I was like, wouldn't it be funny if I had Sam on?
And I'm used to it. It is funny. I was like, you should have played it off. You should be like, and Samantha Schacher is here, and I would have been like, I probably wouldn't have said anything.
So, guys, Sam is here from Pop Trigger. I'm so excited to have you back. You were on one of the first ever episodes of Murder with Friends that I refused to rewatch because I wasn't good. I don't think.
Are you
at the time?
Nuts?
You were great.
You're
but
fantastic.
It's kind of cringy for me to watch older episodes, but I'm so happy to have you back, especially because we've been talking about covering this case for a long time. I know it's been requested as well. We're talking about Jodi Arias today. And Jodi Arias, if you're not from the United States, was one of the major trials, cases that fascinated the American public for years. And I kind of was resistant to sit down and talk about it, but then I learned that you are somewhat of an expert on the case. Can you explain how you learned about Jodi Arias and how you came to know so much about her story?
Yes, so I worked on a show on HLN, and HLN 5 years ago was all about covering trials. So they were covering Casey Anthony, and then Jodi Arias, and then Trayvon Martin, and in between that, I began working there right before, like at the tail end of Casey Anthony. This was on the Dr. Drew show on HLN, the tail end of Casey Anthony, and then right into the Jodi Arias show. And at that point, I was a regular guest. So I was on Monday through Friday, and then eventually I became the co-host of the show. But in that interim, we covered the Jodi Arias trial in and out. So that means every court document that was submitted to court, I had to read. Every photograph which haunts you, like some of those photographs, because this is a horrific crime, and we'll get into the murder. So yeah, from the photographs to the documents to the interviews. So we would interview jurors to later on the people that were involved in the case. We did have a correspondence that actually did interview Jodi as well, but for 5 years we followed it because there's many layers to this case. There was first the criminal trial, then there's the aggregation phase, or then there's the sentencing phase, and this took over 5 years. So and I was at Dr. Drew for about 5 years. So to some degree, we always had some Jodi Arias to cover when we were there. If not, we were covering in the beginning every single moment of it.
Yeah, and while this was a huge case for the United States, what I was surprised to learn from my research is that it didn't really transcend internationally that much. So for maybe a viewer that has never heard about Jodi Arias before or this trial, how would you sort of sum up what themes can they expect to hear about on today's show?
Okay, so the themes, the reason why it captivated the public, and that's so, again, so sad to say, we talked about this, I think we were talking about O.J. Simpson. To say captivated, right? To say that it became like a circus and almost entertainment value is weird to say because this is somebody that lost their life in a very horrific way. But what the trial was really about was about, you heard a lot of sex because their relationship had to do with a lot of deviant sex in his mind, right? Because he was Mormon, and their relationship was primarily sexual, and that came up a lot during the trial, and that captivated the public. And then also, you're looking at someone that is completely a pathological liar, a narcissist, beautiful, brilliant, and that captivates the jury and the public as well, because you're looking at someone that comes off at times very charming and meek and humble, but at other times you can see that when she's caught in her lies, that this is somebody that is highly manipulative and used to getting what she wants, and then not apologetic when you look at her actions after the fact of how she murdered her ex-boyfriend at the time.
You mentioned about her ex-boyfriend, and that is Travis Alexander, and that is who she murdered. So let's talk a little bit about Jodi and Travis and how their story begins. So Jodi and Travis meet September 2006. And how would you describe who these people are and how they met?
Well, Travis was very well liked. He
staunch Mormon. I think that's important to bring up early on.
Very staunch Mormon, and that is very important because that did affect his relationships in the sense that he would feel guilty when it came to sex. He would feel guilty even dating someone that wasn't Mormon. Jodi Arias later became Mormon because of him.
Months after they started dating.
Yeah, and that's also, there's other times where we were able to interview some of her friends in the past where she'd always kind of glob on to something, right?
Right, so she and Travis meet at a work conference and
in Vegas,
in
right?
Vegas.
Yeah.
and they are really taken by each other. And at this point, it seems—
a lot of chemistry.
Yeah, a lot of chemistry. It seems very mutual. And I want to go to our first clip, which is from a Lifetime movie that I'm sure you've seen.
I did have to see that because we reviewed it.
Yep.
I did.
It's a pile of horse shit. But let's take a look at this clip of how Lifetime depicts Jodi and Travis meeting for the first time.
Gentle nudge.
Yeah, that's me. Poison me. I am so ready for a change. I'm Jodi, by the way.
Travis.
Oh God, that movie is so bad.
Yeah, but they did go through the timeline fairly accurately in an hour. And that for most people, it was so much to cover that gave them a kind of like a Reader's Digest version of what happened. So
early on, they're very captivated with each other. Within months, she converts to the Church of Latter-day Saints. And but they also are having sex, and that is a major part of their relationship and sort of a part of the dynamic of power between the two of them. Can you discuss a little bit about how that affected how he viewed the relationship and also how she viewed the relationship?
According to people, it's so sad that we can't give Travis Alexander's account, right? He's 6 feet under, we can't. But according to people that knew him very well, and then Jodi's account changed, so we're gonna have to also look at based on evidence, like things that occurred with their text messages. They had 80,000 emails, even more text messages between them, and a lot of them, and phone messages, a lot of them were recordings or transcripts of those sexual escapades. So Travis loved having sex with her. He loved her free nature of it all, and their sex was very deviant, from oral sex to anal sex to all types of sex. And for him, he felt very guilty, one, having premarital sex. Two, in his mind, according to a number of different people, he felt better about having oral sex or anal sex than like actual.
Right, because it's sort of what we hear about before, that it doesn't count.
It just, yeah.
If it's not vaginal sex, then it doesn't count, and therefore it's less of a sin against God because it's in the butt, which doesn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Make any sense,
so he loved that she was so free. She used sex, according to the prosecution, according to people that knew their relationship, she used sex to control him. So if he was distant, if she couldn't get a hold of him for a couple days, if he had communicated to her that later in the relationship that he no longer wanted to be with her, they would end up having sex, or she would send him some very sexual texts or a very sexual phone call, and they would have these fantasies, and she would draw him back in.
Yeah, so she would draw him back in, but it becomes quickly an on and off again relationship.
Yes, very
it becomes
tumultuous.
a rocky relationship.
Almost from the beginning, it was very tumultuous and based on sex. And she wanted more and more and more, and he was always conflicted with a number of different things. But I think he also sensed that she wasn't on, she's not sane. I mean, she is. I mean, she deserves she's not somebody that could have used an
insanity defense.
An insanity defense. I believe one of the psychologists, Janine Marnette, she diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder, but that doesn't excuse you from your behavior. That just is a showcase of like how your behavior is.
And his friends start saying that they viewed her as very unstable. There were a number of accounts that I read of her going through his Facebook, going through his text messages, and then also listening in on conversations.
Oh yeah, they would
creeping out his friends.
Yeah, the friends would be over, and she would say that she's in another room, or Travis would want to have like talk to a friend, and they would open up the door and she'd be on her knees like listening in. Her getting into his voicemail, his Facebook, her crawling into, of course, this is according to the prosecution. There's no cameras showing her crawl into his house through a doggy door. But there's been a number of cases, and a number of people witnessed that they would see her wake up in his house the next day and he didn't know how she got in, and then later they found out she'd crawl through the doggy door, slashing his tires when she thought that he was straying, and stalking him. Full-blown, stalking him. I mean, she even moved to Mesa, Arizona when they were together briefly, and then even after the fact that he didn't want to be with her anymore, she stayed in Mesa, and then finally she ended up going back to California and then coming back again. We'll get to that.
And I think this is a good time. Let's just hear from Jodi in her own words about her account of what their relationship was like.
Nobody really knows what was going on behind closed bedroom doors except him and I.
This relationship was about sex.
it eventually became sex.
But Jodi says that she was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with a sexual relationship that seemed to be going nowhere.
You know, you love someone, and it makes you know, it's hard to think, I really love this person, but I know I'm never going to be with him, and I know I'm not going to marry him. And so I knew that I needed to make some changes.
Early in 2008, Jodi did just that. Doing them both a favor, she moved back home to Wairika, leaving Mesa and Travis behind.
You know, when she moved back to California, that's when it really seemed to him to be a closing point where, okay, finally that chapter of my life is over.
But Sam, just before we go to break, is this the closing point? Is this the end of the chapter?
Nope.
Seems like we're just getting started.
We're just getting started. This is where she is getting pushed. Her buttons are being pushed by him pushing her aside, and this is the buildup to what we're about to see.
And in part 2, we're gonna tell you all about what we see, and what we see becomes murder. We'll see you then.